Hello everyone, welcome back. JWT here. In today's video, let's learn what is authorization and authentication and how to do those two things using JWT tokens and sessions. First of all, let's start by explaining what is authentication. When police officer stops you on the street and asks you for a passport, police officer usually does that because he wants to identify you, to see who you are. So it asks you for your passport. Then you give him your passport and he take a look at your passport. He sees your picture, he sees your name, surname, your, passport number or unique number or something like that. And then he identified you. He knows who you are. So you are authenticated now to him. And in the programming, it's the similar thing. Like if client wants to send the request to the server, it needs to send something so server can identify client to know who the client is. That's first problem. So what can client send to identify itself? Well, it can send username and password, right? And then server can look at the database of username and passwords and see is there any match. If it is, client is identified properly, it's authenticated properly. Now, the problem number 2 is authorization. Now that server know you send your username and you are registered in the system, right? Server knows who you are authenticated, but some actions can be performed only by administrators. You can imagine one application, let's say you imagine a forum, and let's say that on that forum only administrators can create topics and regular users can only drop a comments on certain topics. So if you try to create a topic to invoke some endpoint for topic creation, you need to have role administrator, right? And that's what authorization is all about. After you know who you are dealing with, so your client identified, you authenticated him, you need to check his roles. You need to authorize him to see if he has proper roles to do certain actions. And that's what are authentication and authorization and what is the difference between them. Now, I told you one of the ways is client can send username and password, but that seems really risky. Like with every request, you need to send your username and password. It's logical that there is some /login endpoint which you call with, let's say, username and password, and then if that succeeds, server remembers somehow that you are logged in, and that somehow can be done using sessions. So after you are logged in, server remember on the server that you are logged in the session. Let's just for a second explain what are the sessions and how they work. So first of all, it's important to realize that HTTP protocol is stateless, which means that state is not shared between requests, between multiple requests, which means that requests are totally isolated and independent. They don't share state. But in our situation with logging, we need to share state between multiple requests because we first want to invoke request number 1, and then when we are logged in, we don't want before second request to be authenticated again. We want that server somehow remembers that we are logged in. How server accomplish that? Well, basically /login endpoint will remember in the RAM memory that we are logged in. It will put that inside the session, and /login will return us session ID as a response. And then next time when we want to send the request, through the header we want to pass session ID. And using that session ID, server will realize that we are logged in. I mean, server will try to find session based on session ID. It will realize, okay, we are already logged in, and yeah, that works. You're fine. You don't need to authenticate again. But there is one problem with the session regarding scaling that we learned in the previous tutorial. Let's get back to the diagram for a second. So let's say that you try to log in. You are a client, right? You are hitting load balancer. Load balancer randomly choose one of the machines. Let's say machine number 2. Machine number 2 try to authenticate you, and it successfully authenticate you. It remembers in the RAM memory that you are authenticated. It puts session inside RAM memory. It will return you session ID. Now you have session ID. You try to invoke some other endpoint. So your client, you're sending your session ID through the request header, because session IDs are usually sent through request header. Now load balancer randomly need to send you to one of those 3 machines. Let's say that this time load balancer send you here. But that session ID is not inside machine 1 RAM memory. That session ID reside in machine 2. That's the problem. Authorization and authentication based on session is stateful, which means that state is saved in the machine. If you have multiple machines, this problem can happen. Now on this machine you are not logged in, right? You remember in the previous video I told you that application can work properly with one instance, but it won't work properly with multiple instances. And this is the example. If you have only one instance, your application is working fine because all sessions are kept in the same machine, in the same RAM memory of one machine. But if you have multiple machines, you have this problem with sessions. This problem doesn't exist with JWT tokens because JWT tokens are stateless. So those tokens don't rely on state. Let's see how those tokens work. When you work with JWT tokens, which is a shorthand of JSON Web Tokens, you're sending JWTs with every request, and one JWT includes information about you. So usually it includes your either username or some kind of ID that will properly identify you to the server. So when you work with JWTs, you don't need to remember anything in the RAM memory of the application. There is no session. In every request, server needs to authenticate and authorize you again. So in every request, you are authenticated and authorized. JSON Web Token is basically one JSON. It has header, payload, and signature. I won't bother you too much. You can go to jwt.io/introduction and you can find everything that you need regarding those tokens there. You can see that various information among them. The most important ones are that JWTs can be encrypted or signed. Encrypted means that client will not see the content of the token. Signed tokens means that client can see the content of the token, but it cannot modify the content of the token without secret. Also, you can see somewhere here that public, you can sign your tokens either using a secret or public-private key. You know what are public-private keys? Secret is symmetrical thing. So if you have some message, if you apply secret, you get some encrypted message. Then you need to apply same secret and you will get message again. That is different than public-private key, which is asymmetric. So when you are doing one operation, you need to use private key and another operation public key. And that's basically it. I don't want to bother you too much with JWTs. Let's take a look at the next video how to implement this authorization and authentication and JWTs using Spring Security, and then I think those JWTs will be much clearer to you and you will understand them much way better. See you in the next video.